Well, I am so excited to be here today with my friend and colleague, Tom, who recently joined Jito as Chief Commercial Officer. Prior to joining Jito, Tom was at Jane Street for 22 years. Of course, Jane Street is one of the largest and most influential trading firms in the world. They trade trillions of dollars annually across ETFs, options, commodities, bonds, and crypto, all of which Tom traded during his time there. And as I was preparing for this presentation, what really struck me was I don't think I know anyone other than Tom who's managed to survive at a trading firm like Jane Street for 22 years.
Yeah, well.
So I talked to some of our mutual colleagues to try to understand how that happened. And all of them said three things. They said that Tom is incredibly intelligent, he gets along with everyone, and he doesn't take anything personally. So those are qualities that will be phenomenal for your second stint here in crypto. So
if you think that's nice, wait till you hear what people say about you. It's even better.
This is all about you. So let's get into the questions. So obviously, when you were at Jane Street heading up crypto, you were very involved in the industry in 2021 and 2022. And then Jane Street stepped back a little bit in 23. You started trading exotic options, is my understanding. So what led you away from that and to this decision to come to crypto full time?
Yeah, it's been quite a journey, and you never think about it while you're in the middle of it. So in retrospect, I was part of the team at Jane Street that started looking at crypto back in 2017, and we built a pretty substantial business across basically every axis of crypto. But in the second quarter of 2023, Jane Street made the decision strategically to scale back some of its operations on the back of a lot of the US regulatory enforcements. And so, I'd been there for 20 years at this point. I had a lot of loyalty to the firm. I stayed and I started helping us build out our exotic options business, which is very, very different. It's like, I went from working with like crypto founders and entrepreneurs and builders to all of a sudden negotiating ISDAs with like big banks. And so I did that for about 18 months. But I got this feeling, if you're not full-time crypto, the more time you stay away from it, the more remote you get from all of this stuff that was happening. And at some point I realized that I really, really loved and missed the space. And so, I made the decision, the hard decision to leave Jane at the beginning of this year. And my plan was actually to take some time off, but, and learn a little bit about all the stuff I'd missed. And, I'd never heard of Jito when I left. But once you start meeting the team, once you see them operate, it becomes a very easy decision.
Awesome. It's good to hear it was an easy decision.
Leaving was a hard decision. Joining Jito was very, very easy.
Well, especially when you're with someone like Rebecca Reddick, but we don't want to turn it into a Rebecca love fest.
Star. There's nobody better. Nobody better.
So, okay, what I would love to understand more about also is, you had lots of different ecosystems in crypto that you could have gone into. You chose Solana, and then you had a lot of different companies that you could have brought your talents to, and you chose Jito. I've also heard you talk about Jane Street in the context of it not being a trading firm, but it being a critical infrastructure firm for our financial markets in terms of helping to provide liquidity and efficiency and transparency in our markets. And it kind of struck me that sounds a little bit similar to what Jito does. So there's a few questions packed in there. Why Solana? Why Jito? And then are Jito and Solana, or Jito and Jane Street may be a little more similar than meets the eye.
Yeah, that's a really interesting framing for this, because I do think fundamentally they're very similar in that the way that they approach the problem is very specific. And the way that you described it, I think is really important. So just to put it into context, if you think of Jane Street, if Jane Street thought of itself as a trading firm, then its job is to make the best possible trades at all times. But if you think of yourself as an infrastructure firm, then what you're trying to build is a company that assists in the formation of fair, orderly, and efficient markets. Like you are a markets infrastructure firm, your job is to make the markets work better. And then you get compensated for that. And I think Jito is very similar in the sense that Jito offers a few different products. Its core block engine bundler product. The goal is to make the network more performant. and not only make the network more performant, but share the rewards that are generated by this activity with the validators, with the stakers. And so it's this dual function of making the system work better, but also making the users benefit from the activity that is happening on the network. There's another product that is restaking. How do you build apps on top of Solana that uses the Jito token to enhance security? And there's also the liquid staking token, which is, again, a very specific solution geared towards the users. Like, how do you make the users benefit from just holding Solana and creating additional layers of flexibility so you get this max yield, but you also do it in a way that abstracts away a lot of the operational and technical requirements of maintenance, while being able to use it as collateral on other projects and things like that. So, being very specific about the problems that you're trying to solve and understanding what it means in the entire, in the context of the entire ecosystem.
Okay. The last two panels actually were about stablecoins. And coming from a firm like Brevan, I spend a lot of time thinking about how do we grow institutional adoption in our industry. And from my perspective, one of the things I think we've been missing for the last 16 years is this concept of a public-private partnership, which our traditional financial markets have benefited from really since 1790, when Alexander Hamilton laid the framework for public support of our US capital markets. And I think the reason we have the most trusted, safe, deep liquidity markets in the United States is partly because of that public-private partnership. And now, of course, crypto is getting an invitation with this new administration to finally enjoy that public-private partnership. So I think that's at least in part what may have been holding institutions back. I would love to hear your perspective. Where do you see institutions today in terms of their involvement with crypto in the future? And then I've also heard you talk about the importance of things like exit points, how important it is for institutions. It's one thing to get into a trade. It's always easier to get in than it is to get out. And just having the kind of infrastructure that allows institutions to trade efficiently and transparently and with deep liquid markets. So turn it over to you.
Yeah, so I've talked about exit points before, and just to contextualize for people who are not kind of as deeply in the weeds as firms like yours or firms like Jane Street, if you're a trading firm, if you're an institutional allocator, if you're a portfolio manager, the decision to enter a trade is only the first part of it. Trade sizing is just as an important of a consideration as whether or not you have a trade signal at all. So when you think about a trade, you don't think about whether or not a binary, is this a good or bad trade? You think about it in terms of EV, the expected value. And the expected value is just like the edge times the position size. And one big cap on position size is, what does an exit look like in a stress scenario? We ran this at Jane Street all the time, which is, okay, in a time of stress, what is the impact or what is the loss if you have to liquidate this portfolio in 2 days, 5 days, in 10 days? I'm guessing from the VC side, you would have much more experience in this, but how do you exit? As you said, it's a very important consideration. And so the exit liquidity is a very key component to the position size, the limit of your exposure. And building deeper markets just allows you to building deeper infrastructure allows you to increase the amount of risk that you're willing to gain, or the amount of exposure that you're willing to take to any specific project, ecosystem, in any sort of trade or portfolio. And so a big part of this is, and we saw the same thing when it came to some of the discussion around tariffs. If the rules of the road are uncertain, if the system is unstable, it becomes very important, it becomes much more difficult to make long-term decisions about how you're going to allocate capital. So the more performant you make the network, the more stable you make the network, the more scalable you make the network, the more you build that sort of infrastructure, the easier it is for you to actually contemplate, how are you going to build on this? How are you going to invest in this area? How big are you willing to go? And so I think that from the exit standpoint, that's why exit are so important. And I'm sure everybody here has had an experience where like you look at the mark to market on some of your altcoin bags and you're like, oh, this is great. But if you actually try to monetize it, it becomes a problem. But on your earlier question on the institutions, I think, institutions is like a word that comes up so much in crypto and has for years. Like I remember in 2018, people were talking about the institutions are coming. And then you had the situation where like you saw these institutions and they would make this big hire, like, oh, we've got this head of crypto or head of digital assets. But as soon as there was a market downturn, a lot of those people went away. But I think what's happening now is that institutional activity has decoupled from price action in a very material way. Every single large institution has teams of people who are, has a head of digital assets, has a team of people who are looking and are actually fundamentally building in a way that it's very hard to just pull that investment right away. And so I think that the institutional story has become much more resilient, and that's just going to help the space because there's lots of different ways that these institutions can interact with the space now. And part of the way that we're thinking about it is trying to break this kind of nebulous concept of institutions into more manageable buckets. And so we're thinking about like, at Jito, we're thinking about like buy side as like the institutional investors, the allocators, the people who actually make the decisions about how they're going to spend their money. And then we look at the sell side, and these are people who are primarily on the distribution side, who tend to service the buy side. And so these are like the banks and the prime brokers and the exchange platforms and people like that who are providing ways that make it easier for buy side to express their investment objectives. And then there are people who kind of sit between, like trading shops and clearinghouses and custodians who kind of support the architecture, the fundamental functioning of markets. But the thing to keep in mind is that each of them have different needs, and you have to be very specific about, okay, what is the need that you were trying to solve, and how, for us, how does Jito help you actually accomplish this? And so the needs of the buy side are very, very different than the needs of the sell side. And the needs of the buy side, I think, is absolutely crucial for everybody here that's in this room. Like, I think the bull case for any of us, anybody who is building anything in this space, is to grow the user base of Solana. That is it. Like, if you are building a project and you're not focused on increasing the user base, like, you're focused on the wrong thing. Like, competition is great. It improves, like, the services and things like that. But fundamentally, we're all rowing in the same direction. How do we build the investment thesis for Solana? How do we prove or demonstrate that the growth path for Solana? How do we make it as scalable as possible for people, either if you're investing side or if you're on the building side? How do we build this?
Awesome. Okay, I think we only have time for one more question. And I have a secret that a lot of you probably don't know, but Tom was an actor before he joined Jane Street. So my final question for you is, with this next move into crypto, joining Jito, would you characterize this as clear and present danger, the right stuff, Back to the Future, or It's a Wonderful Life? And why?
Oh my God. Can I tell you honestly how I feel? Like, this feels a lot. What's that Robert De Niro movie where he's like a 70-year-old and he interns at like some tech company? And I mean, it's embarrassing to be in New York and talk about a Robert De Niro movie and have it be what the intern, like, there's so many that are based here. But I do feel like sometimes, I just show up and I'm like, does anybody need coffee? Can I help? And then hopefully, there's a happy ending at the end of all of this stuff. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all.